He lifted his champagne flute in my direction like he was bestowing an honor instead of signing my professional death warrant. I want to take a moment to recognize Oakley Blair for her exceptional work stabilizing our operations this year, Jonathan said, standing beneath a massive projection screen displaying our turnaround metrics in gleaming gold numbers. Her efforts have been instrumental in bringing Crescent Dynamics back from the edge. The ballroom full of executives, board members, and regional directors offered polite applause. Measured, professional, the kind of clapping that happens when people know something else is coming. Jonathan's smile widened as he turned slightly toward the cameras positioned at the back of the room. But as we transition into our next phase of aggressive expansion, we need leadership that understands the vision I've been building toward for the past 2 decades. Which is why tonight I'm proud to announce that my nephew Tyler Brennan will be stepping into the role of Chief Operations Officer effective immediately. My role, my title. The position he'd promised was mine if I delivered results. The applause grew louder this time. More enthusiastic. Tyler walked onto the small stage they erected near the front windows. His custom suit probably costing more than I'd spent on rent in the past 6 months. He shook Jonathan's hand for exactly the right amount of time while photographers captured the moment. His expression was perfectly calibrated, humble, determined, ready to serve. I stood near the back corner of the ballroom next to the people who actually understood how this company functioned. The warehouse managers who could recite SKU counts from memory. The logistics coordinators who knew which carriers would actually show up on time. The operations analysts who'd spent the past year learning my systems because their old processes had been held together with duct tape and prayers. Behind Jonathan, the projection screen cycled to a new slide from crisis to clarity. 12-month transformation. Revenue graphs trending upward. Profit margins recovered. Efficiency metrics that had been in the red now solidly green. Every single data point on that screen came from systems I'd built, models I'd designed, processes I'd fought to implement, while half the executive team told me I was wasting time on details that didn't matter. My name wasn't mentioned once on any of the slides. This company doesn't succeed because of any one person, Jonathan continued, his voice taking on that rehearsed inspirational tone he used in investor calls. It succeeds because we have the courage to make bold decisions about our future leadership. Tyler brings fresh perspective, innovative thinking, and the kind of strategic vision that will take Crescent Dynamics into the next decade. Fresh perspective. Tyler had been with the company for exactly 8 months, most of which he'd spent in meetings learning terminology. I didn't wait for the speech to end while Jonathan talked about legacy and vision and the importance of family values in business. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, down the corridor lined with framed awards and magazine covers featuring Jonathan's face, past the executive wing with its thick carpets and original artwork. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Their attention was locked on the stage, on Tyler, on the future. They'd just been told to celebrate. Jonathan's office door was open when I reached it. He was already inside, having somehow slipped out during the applause. His suit jacket hung on the back of his chair. He was pouring himself bourbon from a crystal decanter, looking satisfied with himself. "Oh," he said, noticing me in the doorway. His tone was warm, casual, like we were old friends. "Hell of a night, isn't it? You should be proud. The turnaround you executed was exactly what we needed." I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "You told me results were all that mattered, and they do." He took a sip of his drink. "You delivered exceptional results, but operations and leadership are different skill sets. Tyler has the background for where we're going next." "Background," I repeated. "He has an MBA from a school his family donated a library to. I have 12 years of operational experience across 4 industries. I just pulled your company out of a nosedive that would have ended in liquidation." Jonathan set his glass down and looked at me with something approaching sympathy. "You're upset. I understand that. But this decision isn't about diminishing what you've accomplished. It's about strategic positioning for our next phase. You promised me this role if I hit the targets, and you'll be taken care of," he said smoothly. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored, expensive paper. He slid it across the polished wood surface toward me. Opened it. Inside was a gift card. $100 to a high-end spa downtown. Take some time off, Jonathan said, gesturing at the card like it was generous. You've been running hard all year. Go relax. Recharge. You earned it. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the distant music from the ballroom and the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system. I looked at the card. $100. Roughly what I'd spent on coffee alone during the first month when I was working 18-hour days trying to untangle their catastrophic inventory system. I looked back at Jonathan. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I slid the card into my bag. Thank you, I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That's it. That's it. I walked out of his office, past the ballroom doors where Tyler was now surrounded by executives eager to introduce themselves, down the elevator, through the lobby, out into the November cold, where my breath formed clouds in the air. Jonathan thought that was the end of it, that I'd accepted his valuation of my work, my year, my future. What he didn't understand was that at 9 o'clock the next morning, Crescent Dynamics would discover that the systems keeping them operational weren't actually theirs. And the licensing fees were about to change. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. If you like stories where competent professionals get underestimated, arrogant executives confuse access with ownership, and one spa gift card becomes the most expensive $100 in corporate history, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to hear what happened when they tried to log into their systems the next morning and discovered that replaceable wasn't quite the word they thought it was. My name is Oakley Blair. I'm 37 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was the person you called at Crescent Dynamics when you needed the impossible fixed before the quarterly earnings call. Crescent Dynamics was a mid-sized manufacturing and distribution company, 42 facilities across 7 states, industrial components, specialty materials, contract manufacturing for larger brands. Not sexy, not cutting edge, but substantial enough that when we stumbled, our clients noticed and our creditors started making calls. When I arrived 14 months ago, Crescent was circling the drain. On paper, everything looked manageable. Revenue was down but not catastrophic. Profit margins were thin, but not non-existent. The balance sheet showed assets that could cover liabilities if you squinted at the numbers the right way. In practice, the company was bleeding out from 1,000 small wounds. Production schedules were constantly behind because materials arrived late or in the wrong quantities. Quality control was catching defects after products had already shipped, leading to costly recalls and destroyed client relationships. Warehouse inventory was a mess. Some facilities overstocked on slow-moving items while others ran out of critical components mid-peak production run. The logistics system was so fragmented that shipments regularly got sent to the wrong facilities or sat on loading docks for days because no one knew they'd arrived. Financial controls were practically non-existent. Purchase orders were approved through a chain of emails that sometimes took weeks. Expense tracking was handled differently at each facility. The accounting team spent most of their time reconciling discrepancies instead of providing useful analysis. The technology infrastructure holding all of this together was a nightmare. The ERP system was 15 years old and had been customized so many times by different vendors that nobody fully understood how it worked anymore. Each facility had developed its own workarounds, spreadsheets, databases, paper logs. When corporate needed consolidated reports, someone had to manually pull data from 42 different sources and hope the numbers were accurate. The board called it a restructuring opportunity. The bank called it a covenant violation risk. Jonathan called it temporary turbulence. I got a 30-minute interview in Jonathan's office on a Tuesday afternoon. He showed me the most recent quarterly report, loss margins, client churn rates, delayed projects. The final page showed projected cash flow for the next 6 months. The line dropped below 0 in month 4. We have quarters, not years, he said. I need someone who can stabilize operations and get us back to profitability. You'll report directly to me. Full authority to make necessary changes. Full authority or full responsibility? Yes. He smiled slightly. What's the difference? Authority means I can make decisions without getting second-guessed by every director who thinks their department is special. Responsibility means I get blamed when your systems break but don't get the power to fix them. You'll have authority, he said, within reasonable parameters. That phrase should have sent me running. Didn't. I'd seen enough failing operations to know that if I could turn this one around, I'd never have to prove myself again. Took the job. The first 6 weeks, I didn't implement anything. I watched. I visited every facility, sat in production meetings, walked warehouse floors at 5 in the morning to see how shift changes actually happen versus how the schedule said they happened. I talked to machine operators, inventory clerks, shipping coordinators, the people who actually touched the work. I listened to facility managers complain about corporate mandates that ignored local realities. I watched quality inspectors explain defects that kept recurring because nobody had fixed the root cause. I sat with purchasing agents who showed me approval chains that required 7 signatures for a $500 order. At the distribution center in Ohio, I learned that incoming materials were logged in 3 different systems that didn't talk to each other. The warehouse manager kept his own spreadsheet because the official inventory count was always wrong. At the manufacturing plant in Tennessee, the production scheduler showed me how she'd built her own database to track machine maintenance because the corporate system didn't account for downtime. At the corporate office, I discovered that financial reporting took the first 10 days of every month because data had to be manually extracted, cleaned, and reconciled from dozens of sources. Everyone was working incredibly hard. They were just working in chaos. I mapped everything, every data flow, every approval process, every system handoff, every workaround that existed because the official process didn't work. What I found was this. Crescent Dynamics didn't need better people. It needed a functioning nervous system. The company had grown through acquisitions over the past 15 years. Each acquired facility had brought its own systems and processes. Instead of integrating them properly, corporate had just layered new requirements on top. The result was organizational scar tissue, rigid, fragmented, and painful to work with. I knew better than to propose ripping everything out at once. Companies don't survive big bang transformations. I started with data. All those fragmented systems, the old ERP, the facility databases, the endless spreadsheets, they all generated data. It was just scattered, inconsistent, and impossible to use for Decision M. I built a new layer through my own company, Blair Systems Integration. A data platform that sat above their existing chaos and pulled information into a unified structure, nightly extracts from each source, automated cleaning and normalization, consolidated dashboards that showed real-time operational status across all facilities. I ran it quietly at first. For 4 weeks, I sent experimental reports to 3 facility managers I trusted. Try using this for your production planning, I told one. He came back 3 weeks later with numbers. Machine utilization up 14%. Overtime reduced. On-time delivery improved. All because he could finally see accurate information about materials, capacity, and schedules. At month 2, I convinced Jonathan to let me pilot the system across 5 facilities. We already have systems, he said, frowning at the architecture diagrams I'd shown him. Your systems don't work, I replied. That's why your facility managers have built their own. This will cost money we don't have. It's already built, I said. The pilot costs you nothing except time. If it doesn't work, you can fire me and you'll be exactly where you started. If it does work, you'll finally know what's actually happening in your own facilities. He agreed to 3 months. The pilot worked. Materials stopped arriving at the wrong facilities because the system could finally track what was actually needed where. Production schedules became reliable because we could see real-time capacity and maintenance windows. Quality issues decreased because we identified patterns that had been invisible in the fragmented data. The 5 pilot facilities started outperforming the rest of the company so dramatically that the board started asking questions. Jonathan called it better execution. I called it what happens when you stop fighting your own infrastructure. We rolled the platform out company-wide. Took 7 months. It wasn't glamorous work. No clients saw it. No industry publications wrote about it. But it changed everything because once you have clean, unified data, a lot of decisions that seemed impossibly complex suddenly become obvious. We cut 23% of low-margin product lines that consumed resources but generated minimal profit. We consolidated purchasing across facilities, eliminating duplicate vendors and negotiating better rates. We identified and fixed a logistics routing error that had been costing roughly $90,000 per quarter in unnecessary freight charges. We found a quality control issue at one facility that had been causing defects across multiple product lines for 18 months. Once we could see the pattern in the data, the fix took 3 weeks. We discovered that 2 facilities had been ordering the same specialty components separately at different prices. Consolidating those purchases saved approximately $42,000 annually. The financial impact showed up gradually, then all at once. The first quarter after full implementation, operating margin improved by 4.3 percentage points. The second quarter by another 2.7. Client complaints decreased. On-time delivery rates increased. Employee overtime dropped because work could be scheduled efficiently instead of reactively. By month 9, the company was profitable again. Not barely profitable, solidly in the black with improving trajectory. Jonathan called a small celebration in the executive conference room. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," he said, raising a glass. "You've bought us room to breathe." "Room to breathe isn't the same as being healthy," I replied. "You still have structural issues, facility consolidation opportunities, client concentration risk, technology debt. One miracle at a time." He said it wasn't a miracle. It was work. Methodical, unglamorous, detail-oriented work that most executives don't have the patience for. But I didn't argue. As the numbers improved, so did my visibility. Facility managers started copying me on decision emails. The CFO began using my dashboards in board presentations. Directors who'd barely acknowledged me 6 months earlier were now asking for my input on strategic decisions. At one executive meeting, a board member asked, "What happens if Oakley leaves? How do we protect this?" Jonathan laughed. "We'll integrate what she's built into our core infrastructure. Make it permanent." "It is permanent," I said quietly. "It's just not yours." A few people glanced at me, but nobody asked what I meant. Because here's what nobody had paid attention to. From day one, I hadn't come in as a standard employee. After getting burned at 2 previous companies where I'd built critical systems only to watch executives take credit and then eliminate my role once things stabilized, I'd learned when Jonathan hired me, I'd agreed to join his organizational chart. Yes, I'd be head of operations strategy reporting to the CEO, but the platform itself, the data infrastructure, the integration layer, the dashboards and analytics, those would be delivered through my own company, Blair Systems Integration. We drafted a clear licensing and services agreement. Blair Systems owned the platform architecture and all associated intellectual property. Crescent Dynamics had a license to use it across their operations as long as they maintained an active support contract and paid the agreed licensing fees. They could not attempt to reverse engineer the core components. They could not build derivative works based on the architecture. They could not transfer the license to another entity without written approval. Operational oversight of the platform remained with Blair Systems' designated technical lead. If Crescent wanted to terminate the arrangement, they could. 90 days notice transition support provided. License would expire at the end of the term. There was another clause buried in an appendix that legal had reviewed but nobody else read carefully. In the event that Crescent Dynamics materially alters or eliminates the operational authority of Blair Systems' designated technical lead without prior written mutual agreement, Blair Systems may at its sole discretion transition the platform to restricted access mode and or terminate the license with immediate effect. We'd negotiated the language. Legal had approved it. Jonathan had signed it. Then, like most contracts, it disappeared into a digital filing cabinet where nobody thought about it again. Kept my own copy. I didn't think about that clause most days. The arrangement worked. The company was recovering. Jonathan seemed happy with the results until he stood under those projection screens at the anniversary celebration and announced that Tyler Brennan, his nephew, who'd spent the past 8 months attending meetings and learning what an ERP system was, would be taking over operational leadership. No conversation with me beforehand. No discussion about how this might affect existing agreements. Just a public announcement that someone else would now be leading the operations that depended entirely on systems I controlled. That wasn't just insulting, it was a contractual trigger. After I left Jonathan's office with that spa gift card in my bag, I didn't go home immediately. I drove to my own office 4 blocks away, the small suite where Blair Systems Integration operated. I made coffee, sat down at my workstation, opened the administrative console that only I had access to. Crescent Dynamics license status showed active renewal date in 19 days. Support contract active term end in 13 months. Technical oversight Blair Systems technical lead Oakley Blair. Below that were 3 options invisible to anyone at Crescent. Modify oversight status. Enable restricted access mode. Terminate license. I didn't hit terminate. This wasn't about destruction. It was about correction. I clicked Modify Oversight Status. A prompt appeared. Has there been a material change to Blair Systems designated technical oversight without prior written mutual agreement? Clicked Yes. Another prompt. Do you want to initiate restricted access transition? Clicked Yes. Select Delay before restricted mode activates. 0 hours/12 hours/24 hours/72 hours. I selected 24 hours. Not because I wanted maximum chaos, because I wanted to give them 1 business day to realize what they'd done and fix it. 1 chance to call me and have an actual conversation about operational authority and contractual obligations. If nobody reached out, if they really believed this was just a standard promotion and I'd fall in line, then at 9 o'clock the next morning they'd learn differently. Final prompt. Confirm at 0900 next business day. Crescent Dynamics will transition to read-only access. Historical data will remain visible. New data integration, exports, and dashboard updates will be suspended until remediation agreement is executed. Clicked Confirm. Then I went home and slept better than I had in months. They discovered it at 9:07 the next morning. At 8:45 everything was normal. Facility managers were reviewing overnight production reports. The logistics team was coordinating morning shipments. Corporate was pulling data for a client presentation. At 9 o'clock, exactly something changed. The dashboard still loaded. Historical data was visible, but no new information was flowing in. The overnight data integration hadn't run. Real-time status indicators showed stale information from the previous day. Export functions were grayed out. The production planning tools that facility managers relied on weren't updating. The financial dashboards the CFO used were frozen. The system hadn't crashed. It had simply stopped moving forward. Read only. At 9:04 my phone started vibrating. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. At 900 it rang again. Jonathan's direct line. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Oakley Blair, we have a problem. Jonathan said, skipping any greeting. The system isn't updating. None of the facilities can get current data. The dashboards are frozen. Nothing's frozen, I said calmly. The license transitioned to restricted access mode at 9 o'clock this morning. Exactly as specified in your agreement with Blair Systems or what the licensing and services agreement between Crescent Dynamics and Blair Systems Integration. Section 7 Subsection 3. You triggered the material change clause yesterday when you publicly announced that operational leadership was being transferred to someone else without consulting me or modifying our agreement. That clause was for acquisitions or hostile takeovers, he said, voice rising. Not internal promotions. That clause was for any situation where Blair Systems' operational oversight was materially altered without prior written agreement. I said, you announced last night that Tyler would be leading operations going forward. No discussion, no amendment to our contract, no acknowledgement that this might affect existing agreements. You can't just shut us down over a promotion. I didn't shut you down. Your teams have full access to historical data. They can see everything that happened up until this morning. They just can't update anything or generate new reports until we have a conversation about how this arrangement is going to work. This is extortion. This is contract enforcement. There's a difference. In the background I could hear other voices. Someone saying the logistics system wasn't updating. Someone else saying they needed export capabilities restored immediately. How long will it take to fix this? Jonathan demanded. That depends entirely on what you mean by fix, I said. If you mean restore full access, I can do that in under an hour once we have a signed remediation agreement. If you mean replace the entire platform so you don't need me anymore, you're looking at 18 to 36 months and roughly 8 to 12 million. Assuming you find someone competent who doesn't quit halfway through when they realize how complex this is. Silence on the other end. I'll come in at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I said. Have your lawyer present. We can discuss your options. Hung up. For the next 4 hours I worked on other projects. A small client who needed inventory consulting. Some documentation I'd been neglecting. I didn't check my phone constantly. I didn't pace. I'd made my position clear. The next move was theirs. At 1:55 I drove back to Crescent Dynamics headquarters. The conference room on the 20th floor was packed when I arrived. Jonathan sat at the head of the table. Tie loosened, looking like he hadn't slept well. Tyler sat 2 seats down, arms crossed, jaw tight. The CFO was there. The general counsel, 2 board members I recognized from quarterly meetings. A speakerphone in the center of the table glowed with an active call. Someone important dialed in remotely. I didn't sit immediately. I took the spa gift card out of my bag, that same $100 card he'd given me with "You earned it," and placed it in the center of the table. What is that? Tyler asked. I looked at Jonathan. You remember this? He stared at the card but said nothing. Let's not make this personal, the general counsel said. We're all under pressure. Turning this into an emotional dispute won't help anyone. This isn't emotional. I said that card is what Jonathan thought my work was worth after I spent 14 months pulling his company back from insolvency. Today we're going to talk about what it actually costs to function without me. Miss Blair, a woman's voice came through the speakerphone. This is Helen from the board. We understand you're upset about the organizational changes, but holding the company hostage over a reporting structure change seems disproportionate. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I said. I'm enforcing the terms of a contract your lawyer approved. The only thing that changed between yesterday and today is that yesterday you all assumed I'd never actually use the protections built into that contract. What are our options? The CFO asked quietly. Option 1, I said. You proceed as planned. Tyler takes over operational leadership. You treat this as a temporary technical issue and lean on vendor relationships to bridge the gap. In 19 days, when the license renewal comes due, I don't renew it. The platform disconnects completely. Your historical data stays yours, but the engine that processes new information is gone. You're free to rebuild from scratch. Tyler scoffed. That's ridiculous. We'll have an internal replacement operational in less than 6 months. I looked at him directly for the first time. You don't even know where the data sources are, much less how they're normalized and integrated. You think this is just some dashboards in a database. There are 42 separate data sources across your facilities, each with different formats, different update cycles, different reliability levels. The platform handles roughly 370,000 individual data reconciliation decisions every single night. You're going to replicate that in 6 months. His face flushed, but he didn't respond. How long would it actually take with a qualified vendor? Helen asked from the speakerphone. 18 months minimum. I said probably longer. That assumes you find someone good. Give them full access to legacy systems. And your institutional knowledge doesn't walk out the door when frustrated employees quit during the transition. Also assumes the vendor doesn't underbid the project to win the contract and then hit you with change orders when they realize how complex it really is. And with you, Jonathan asked quietly. I can restore full functionality in 45 minutes once we have signed remediation terms. What terms? The CFO asked. 3 things, I said. First, a new 5-year licensing agreement at current market rates. Not the discounted rate you negotiated when you were desperate and I was improving. Second, an explicit operational authority clause that requires my written consent for any changes to how Blair Systems' technical oversight functions, not just legal signature, mine specifically. Third, you issue a corrective communication internally that acknowledges the platform is business-critical infrastructure that cannot be reassigned without proper contractual modification. You want us to admit we made a mistake, Jonathan said. I want you to acknowledge reality, I replied. You can frame the communication however you want. Call it a strategic partnership expansion, deepening our technology collaboration. Make it sound positive. I don't care about the optics. What I care about is not waking up one morning to discover you've decided my role is no longer necessary without having the contractual protection to push back. Tyler leaned forward. You're asking for complete operational control based on a technicality. I'm asking for contractual clarity about something I already have. I said the system you've been using for the past year, it's mine. It's always been mine. You've just been comfortable pretending otherwise because it was working and I wasn't causing problems. That stopped being true the moment you announced you were replacing me with someone who can't tell the difference between a data warehouse and an actual warehouse. Miss Blair. Helen's voice came through again. What you're describing sounds like. What's the compensation structure for this new agreement? Market rate for business-critical infrastructure licensing. I said currently you're paying approximately $240,000 annually. Market rate for a platform this complex supporting a company your size would be closer to $750,000 to $1.2 million annually depending on utilization and support requirements. Someone inhaled sharply. That's a significant increase. The CFO said. Yes, I agreed. It reflects the actual value of what you've been getting at a discount. When we originally negotiated, you were on the edge of bankruptcy and I was an unknown quantity. That's no longer true on either front. You're profitable now, and you've spent the past year proving you can't function without this platform. Jonathan stared at the spa gift card in the center of the table. One of the board members reached over and slid it closer to himself, examining it like it was evidence in a trial. Let me make sure I understand, he said slowly. You're proposing we pay you roughly triple what we currently pay, give you contractual authority that supersedes management decisions, and issue an internal communication that essentially says we can't operate without you. Yes, I said. Or you can spend the next 2 years and approximately $10 million building something inferior while your operations limp along on degraded data quality and hope your clients don't notice. Choice. The room was quiet for a long moment. Can we have some time to discuss this internally? Helen asked. You have until 5 o'clock today. I said after that the licensing fees in my proposal increase by 20% for every 24-hour delay. Not because I'm trying to punish you. Because every day you operate in restricted mode, you're making decisions based on incomplete information and that creates liability risk for me. The longer this goes on, the more risk I'm taking by keeping the platform connected at all. I stood up. I'll be at my office. Send the agreement to my lawyer when you're ready to proceed or send the termination notice. Either way, I need a decision today. I walked out. They signed at 4:47 that afternoon. The new agreement came through my lawyer's email. 5-year term. Licensing fees adjusted to $890,000 annually, reflecting the platform's business-critical status. Explicit language requiring Blair Systems' written consent for any operational authority changes. A clause stating that in the event of future leadership transitions, the technical oversight role could not be reassigned without my approval. The internal memo went out at 6:15 that evening. Effective immediately, Crescent Dynamics is pleased to formalize our expanded strategic partnership with Blair Systems Integration under the continued technical leadership of Oakley Blair. This partnership reflects the business-critical nature of our operational infrastructure and ensures continuity as we pursue ambitious growth initiatives. Tyler Brennan will be focusing his efforts on market expansion and strategic client relationships, supporting our growth into new sectors and geographic markets. No apology, no mention of a gift card, no acknowledgement that they tried to replace me with someone unqualified. But everyone who'd been in that ballroom understood exactly what the memo meant. The nephew wasn't taking over operations. He was being moved away from anything that required actual technical competence. I restored full access to the platform at 5:03 that afternoon, 17 minutes after the signed agreement came through. Within minutes, Facility managers saw their dashboards update with current data. The logistics team saw real-time shipment tracking resume. The production planners saw their scheduling tools come back online. The company exhaled. A facility manager in Tennessee texted me that evening. "Whatever happened today, thank you. We were flying blind this morning." Some of us thought this was the beginning of another crisis. One of the operations analysts sent a message. "Remind me to never play poker with you. Also respect." I sat at my desk that night looking at the spa gift card, which I'd taken back from the conference room table before leaving. I could have thrown it away. Instead, I found a small frame, placed the card inside, and hung it on the wall of my office. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Because that card represented something important, a mindset. A man who looked at a complex, fragile, carefully built system that had saved his company and thought, "This was a nice project. I can hand it over to family now." He saw me as a temporary consultant, a problem solver who'd done her job and could be thanked with a gesture and sent on her way. I saw myself differently as someone who'd built something genuinely valuable and had been smart enough to protect it contractually before anyone realized how dependent they'd become. Those are not the same thing. If there's a lesson here, it's not always hold companies hostage with your contracts. Most of the time you won't have that leverage. Most projects don't create the kind of dependency that gives you negotiating power, but you can build toward it methodically. You do that by actually solving problems instead of just managing them. By creating systems that are genuinely better than what existed before, not just different. By documenting who depends on what and why. By building relationships with the people who actually do the work, not just the executives who take credit for it. You do it by reading the contracts you sign and making sure they protect you before you become valuable enough to discard. By understanding the difference between being an employee and being a strategic vendor. By recognizing when you're building something that will outlast your job title. And you do it by being willing to walk away when someone hands you a gift card and tells you that's your value. Executives who spend their time in boardrooms often think power flows downward from their position, that their title gives them control over everything beneath them in the org chart. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes the person sitting in a small office 4 blocks away running systems nobody else fully understands is the one who actually controls whether the company functions tomorrow morning. The morning after we signed the new agreement, I got an email from Jonathan. Short professional. "Thank you for your flexibility during this transition. Looking forward to our continued partnership." No apology. No acknowledgement that he'd misread the situation. Just forward-looking corporate speak that pretended yesterday had been a normal negotiation between equals. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit in my inbox for a few hours while I worked on other things. Finally, around noon I replied, "Happy to continue supporting Crescent's operational needs. I trust future organizational changes will involve appropriate advanced consultation as outlined in our agreement." Professional come with just enough edge to make the point clear. He never replied to that. 3 months later, Tyler left the company. The official announcement said he was pursuing other opportunities. The reality, according to people still there, was that he'd struggled to find any meaningful role after being publicly moved away from operations. He tried to carve out space in business development, but without operational knowledge, he couldn't speak credibly to potential clients about what Crescent could actually deliver. He'd lasted exactly 11 months total. Jonathan remained company. We maintained a professional working relationship. He never again suggested changing my role or oversight responsibilities. The new contract made such conversations unnecessary. Any change would require my written consent, and we both knew I wouldn't give it without substantial consideration. The company continued to grow. The operational platform I'd built kept evolving, adding capabilities as new needs emerged. The licensing fees increased modestly each year based on inflation adjustments built into the agreement. I hired 2 additional engineers to help maintain and enhance the platform. Not employees of Crescent, employees of Blair Systems. The distinction mattered. I occasionally wondered what would have happened if I'd accepted that initial gift card and stayed quiet. If I'd let Tyler take over and hoped for the best. I'd probably be gone by laid off during some reorganization once they felt stable enough to try managing without me. Or frustrated enough to quit when Tyler inevitably made decisions that undermined everything I'd built. Said, I'm still here, still running the systems that keep the company functional, still protected by a contract that acknowledges my actual value. The spa gift card still hangs on my office wall. Visitors occasionally ask about it. 2024 retirement gift. One client asked, motivation. I said, they didn't ask what I meant. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Your value in any organization isn't determined by your title or your position on the org chart. It's determined by what stops working when you're not there. And if you're smart, if you're strategic, if you're willing to protect yourself before you become indispensable, you can make sure that when someone tries to replace you with their nephew and a gift card, they discover very quickly that some things aren't actually theirs to give away. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next.